I spent 10 days in a coma after a terrible fall down the stairs. When I finally opened my eyes in the hospital, the chair beside my bed was empty. My son was gone. All he left was a crumpled note on the nightstand. "Dad, I sold the house. You're nothing but a burden. Figure it out yourself, don't call me." I broke down, feeling my whole world collapse. Then 3 slow knocks came at the door. A man in an expensive suit walked in and said, "Perhaps your son isn't very smart." I froze when I realized who he was. "I am so grateful you chose to spend your time with me today. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Your city, your country, I want to know." A quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling and reflection. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental, but every lesson carried in these words is absolutely worth your time. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the smell. Sharp antiseptic mixed with something colder, industrial bleach, maybe the kind that doesn't just clean surfaces, but strips them of anything warm. It hit the back of my throat before I even understood where I was, before my brain had caught up with the fact that I was breathing at all. The ceiling above me was white. Not a soft white, a hard fluorescent white, the kind that doesn't forgive anything. 2 long bulbs buzzed overhead with that low, persistent hum that burrows into your skull if you listen too long. I tried not to listen too long. My body felt like it had been taken apart and put back together by someone who'd never done it before. My chest ached with every breath. My left leg throbbed from hip to heel. When I tried to lift my right hand, something tugged at the skin on my wrist, an IV line taped down with white medical tape that had already started to peel at the edges. The machine beside me beeped in slow, indifferent rhythm, tracking the pulse of a man it had no opinion about. I turned my head to the left. There was a chair in the corner, one of those hard plastic visitor chairs, the kind with the metal legs that scrape against linoleum when you pull them out. It was positioned at just the right angle, just the right distance from the bed for someone to sit and watch over a person lying in it. It was empty. Something tightened in my chest that had nothing to do with the IV or the aching ribs. I told myself not to read into it. Ryan was probably down the hall getting coffee, talking to the doctor, filling out insurance forms. That was a Ryan thing to do, always handling the paperwork, always organized. I'd raised him that way. I'd been proud of that. But even as I built that story in my head, another part of me, the older, quieter part, that had learned not to want too much, already knew the chair hadn't been warm in a very long time. I lay still and let the memories come back the way they do after something like this, not all at once, but in pieces, like broken glass being swept into a pile. I remembered the staircase at my apartment building. I remembered reaching for the railing. I remembered the way it gave, not slowly, not like something worn down by age, but suddenly like it had been waiting for me to trust it. I remembered the first impact, the side of my head against the concrete edge of a step, and then a sound like radio static filling every corner of the world, and then nothing. 10 days, the nurse would later tell me. 10 days between that nothing and this ceiling. I'd worked 30 years in a warehouse on the north side of Charleston, loading and unloading freight in heat that could crack asphalt, and I'd walked away from that job with 2 bad knees, a lower back that complained every morning, and $47,000 in a savings account that I'd never touched because I was always saving it for something important. Emergencies. Real ones. I'd given Ryan everything else. Not in a dramatic way, not the way people talk about sacrifice like it's a performance. I just did what fathers do, or what I believed fathers were supposed to do. I worked the overtime. I skipped the things that weren't necessary. When Ryan got into college, I sold my truck and bought a cheaper one, and didn't tell him why the money appeared when it did. When he needed the deposit for his first apartment, it came from a jar I kept behind the canned goods. He never asked about the jar. I didn't need him to ask. I just needed him to be okay. So as I lay there staring at that empty chair, I kept rebuilding the story. He's tired. He's been here every day, and he needed to rest. He stepped out 5 minutes ago. He'll walk through that door any second now. That's when I noticed the piece of paper on the bedside table. It was folded in half, placed beside the plastic water pitcher, not carefully, not with any intention. Set down the way you set down something you're done with. The paper was slightly crumpled, like it had been in a pocket before it ended up here. I recognized the handwriting before I even reached for it. Ryan had always pressed too hard. When he wrote, it was something his third-grade teacher had mentioned, something I'd forgotten, until this exact moment, when the memory surfaced with a viciousness that surprised me. I used to tease him about it when he was small. "You're not carving a monument, buddy. It's just a grocery list." My hand trembled as I reached across and picked it up. The IV tugged again. I barely felt it. I unfolded the paper slowly, the way you open something, when you already suspect what's inside. But you need to see it with your own eyes to believe it. My heart was knocking hard against my chest. The machine beside me picked up the pace. 3 sentences, that was all. "Dad, I already sold the house. You're nothing but a burden. Figure it out yourself. Don't call me." I read it once, then again, then a third time, because the words kept sliding off my comprehension, like water off glass, like my mind was refusing to let them land. Nothing but a burden, 30 years. 2 jobs for a stretch of 6 years when things were tight. The truck I sold. The jar behind the canned goods. His graduation when I stood in that crowd with a button-up shirt I'd ironed 3 times because I wanted to look right for him. And I actually thought that this was what it all added up to. This moment. This kid in the cap and gown who waved at me from across the lawn with a grin that crinkled his eyes the same way his mother's used to. Nothing but a burden. The sob that came out of me wasn't dignified. It wasn't the quiet weeping of a man processing grief. It was ugly and raw, and it shook my whole body, and the machine beside me started beeping faster, like it was panicking on my behalf. The door opened. "Mr. Carter." A woman's voice, steady, professional kind, in that practiced way of people who spend their days walking into rooms like this one. She was middle-aged in blue scrubs, a name badge clipped to her chest that read Linda RN. She took one look at me and didn't ask if I was in pain the way they usually do. She just crossed the room, picked up the box of tissues from the windowsill, and set it on the bed beside my hand. "Is there someone I can call?" she asked. I looked at the paper still in my hand. Then I looked at the empty chair. "No," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected, scraped hollow. "There's no one." Linda didn't push. She stood there for a moment with her hands loosely at her sides, and something in her expression shifted, not pity exactly, but recognition. Like she'd heard those words before and knew there was nothing useful to say after them. She left quietly. The door clicked shut. The room settled back into its hum and beep, and I was alone with a crumpled piece of paper and 67 years of a life that felt in that moment like it had been built on sand. I stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed. The machine beeped. And then, just as the silence became the kind that presses down on you, 3 knocks landed on the door. Not a nurse's knock. Not tentative, not quick. 3 deliberate, unhurried knocks, the kind made by a person who already knows they're going to come in. The door opened before I could say a word. He wasn't a doctor. I knew that the second he stepped into the room, not because of the suit, though the suit alone would have made him stand out in a place like this. It was the way he moved. Doctors move like they're solving a problem. This man moved like he'd already solved it. He was somewhere in his mid-60s, I guessed, silver-haired, clean-shaven, with a jaw that had probably been called distinguished for 30 years and had earned it. The suit was charcoal wool, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent, cut close at the shoulders and hanging without a single wrinkle despite the fact that he'd clearly been wearing it for some time. His shoes were dark Oxford leather buffed to a quiet shine, Not flashy, just precise. He carried a black leather briefcase in his left hand. He held it at his side like it weighed nothing. His eyes found me immediately dark brown, steady, unhurried, and something passed through them that I couldn't name. Not pity, not the careful neutrality of a professional making a visit. Something that landed closer to relief. Like a man who'd been searching for something for a very long time and had just after all those years found it exactly where he hoped it would be. He pulled the visitor's chair from the corner and set it beside my bed. He sat down, placed the briefcase on the floor, folded his hands in his lap, and looked at me the way you look at someone you've been waiting on. "Mr. Carter," he said. His voice was measured low, carrying the easy authority of a man who'd spent decades in rooms where words mattered. "I'm sorry to intrude. I imagine this is not the morning you'd hoped for." I was still holding the paper. I didn't bother to hide it. "I don't know who you are," I said. "No, you wouldn't." He didn't seem troubled by that. "My name is Harold Bennett. I'm an attorney and the chief administrator of a private estate based here in Charleston." He paused, just a beat, just enough to let the next words carry their full weight. "I've been looking for you for a very long time, Mr. Carter." I stared at him. "Looking for me?" "Yes. I'm a retired warehouse worker from North Charleston," I said. My voice came out flat, scraped down to bone. "I don't have a will worth reading. I don't own property anymore, apparently." I looked down at the paper in my hand. "There's nothing to find." Harold Bennett looked at the paper too. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, more like a quiet fury held very still. "Perhaps your son isn't very smart," he said. "Is he?" I blinked. The words were so calm, so matter-of-fact, delivered without flourish, the way you might observe that it looked like rain. And yet they landed in the center of my chest, like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings outward in all directions. "You don't know my son," I said. "No," Harold agreed. "But I know what he just did, and I know what he doesn't know." He held my gaze without flinching. "Those two things are about to become very important." I should have thrown him out. I should have pressed the call button and asked Linda to come back. Instead, I found myself watching his hands still folded neatly in his lap, no fidgeting, no tells, and I thought this man has sat in hard conversations before. This man is not afraid of what he's about to say. "What do you want?" I asked. "To tell you the truth," Harold said. "All of it. It's going to take some time, and some of it is going to be difficult to hear." He paused. "But I think, Mr. Carter, or rather I think you deserve to hear it more than you deserve what's happened to you this morning." Something about the way he said it, not with drama, not performing sympathy, just stating it like a plain and obvious fact, made the back of my eyes burn in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights. "Before I say anything else," Harold continued, "I need to ask you something." His eyes dropped just briefly to my right wrist. "That bracelet you're wearing, the silver one." My hand moved before my brain caught up, a reflex, pulling my wrist slightly toward my chest, the way you instinctively protect something when you sense it might be taken. I'd worn the bracelet since before I could remember. It had been on my wrist when the staff at St. Andrew's Children's Home logged me in as a new intake. No one had ever told me where it came from. I'd never been able to find out. I'd stopped asking years ago. I never took it off. "What about it?" I said. Harold didn't reach for it. He just looked at it the way you look at something you've been searching for across a great distance and have finally found close enough to touch. "I've seen that bracelet before," he said quietly. "In photographs, in documents, in a description written by a forensic archivist who spent 14 months trying to match a piece of silver jewelry to a family crest." My mouth was dry. "What family?" Harold reached down and opened the briefcase on the floor beside him. His movements were deliberate, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. He drew out a photograph old enough that the edges had softened and the colors had shifted toward warm sepia, and he held it out to me between two fingers. I took it. It was a photograph of a little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing in front of a tall iron gate set into a stone wall. The gate was open. Behind it, visible in the background, rose a white 3-story house with black shutters and columns across the front. The kind of house that belonged to a certain kind of Charleston family, the kind whose name you saw carved in stone on buildings downtown. The little boy was squinting into the sun. He was smiling, and on his right wrist, clearly visible, catching the light, a silver bracelet. My hand started shaking so badly that the photograph trembled. The bracelet in the photograph was identical to the one on my wrist. Not similar, not close. Identical, the same narrow gauge, the same small engraved crest on the face, the same slight irregularity on the left side where the silver had been shaped by hand, not machine. "That boy," I said. My voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Who is that boy?" Harold looked at me steadily. His expression was careful. Not cruel, not pitying, just present the way a person is present when they understand that the next few words are going to rearrange someone's entire world. "That little boy," Harold said, "is you, taken in the summer of 1961 in front of your family home." He let a beat of silence pass. "Your real name is not Joseph Carter." The machine beside me beeped. Outside in the hallway, someone laughed at something, a quick, ordinary sound that felt like it was coming from a different planet. "Then what is it?" I asked. Harold reached into the briefcase again. This time he removed a document, thick, official, bound with a dark ribbon. He placed it on the bed beside my hand without opening it. "Your name," he said, "is William Ashford, and the man standing beside you in that photograph," he pointed to a tall figure just visible at the edge of the frame, one hand resting on the little boy's shoulder, "is your father, Edmund Ashford." He paused. "He spent the last 40 years of his life looking for you, and when he died, he left you everything he had." The room didn't spin. It didn't do anything dramatic. It just became very, very quiet, like the moment after a sound so large that the silence afterward is its own kind of weight. I looked down at the document on the bed, at the bracelet on my wrist, at the photograph of a little boy squinting into the sun in front of a house that apparently had his name on it. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the wreckage of the morning, something cracked open. Something that had been sealed shut for 63 years and let in just the thinnest sliver of a feeling I hadn't felt in so long that it took me a full 10 seconds to recognize it. Hope. I don't know how long I stared at that photograph before I understood what I was actually seeing. At first, my brain did what brains do when they encounter something impossible. It looked for the rational explanation. Old photo. Similar bracelet. Coincidence. There were probably dozens of silver bracelets in Charleston that looked like mine. Jewelry got copied. Designs got repeated. This didn't mean anything. Except it did, because I knew this bracelet, the way you know the back of your own hand. I'd worn it for 63 years. I knew the exact weight of it against my wrist, the way it sat slightly heavier on the outer edge, the small imperfection on the left side where the silver curved just a fraction of a millimeter too tight, like the craftsman had second-guessed himself midway through. I knew the crest on the face, a small engraved design I'd spent years trying to identify, and never could, because wherever I'd grown up, and whoever I'd been before St. Andrew's Children's Home had taken me in, that part of my life was simply gone. The bracelet in the photograph had the same imperfection. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to set the photograph down on the bed before I dropped it. "That's my bracelet," I said. My voice came out like gravel. "That's exactly my bracelet." "Yes," Harold said, "it is. But that's—" I pressed my fingers to my mouth for a second, trying to hold myself together. "That boy can't be more than 5 years old." 4.5, Harold said. The photograph was taken in June of 1961 at the front gate of the family property in the historic district. Your father had just bought you a bicycle for your birthday 2 months early because he couldn't wait. Something moved across Harold's expression, something old and private and deeply felt. He was like that. He was never very good at waiting when it came to you. The words hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for, and my throat closed up so fast it startled me. I swallowed hard. You keep saying my father. I managed. I grew up in an orphanage. I don't have a father. You have one, Harold said firmly. Or rather, you had one. A very stubborn, very devoted, deeply impossible man who refused to accept what everyone around him kept telling him for 63 years. He leaned forward slightly. Mr. Carter, what do you know about the name Ashford? I shook my head. Nothing, it's a street name. There's an Ashford Avenue over in Mount Pleasant. Ashford Capital Group, Harold said. Downtown Charleston. 40-story building on Meeting Street, glass and steel, the Ashford crest on the lobby floor in black marble. Something flickered at the edge of my memory. I'd driven past that building 100 times. Everyone in Charleston knew Ashford Capital. Old money, real old money, the kind that had been in the ground here longer than the city had been incorporated. I wet my lips. That's one of the biggest private equity firms in the state. In the Southeast, Harold corrected without any pride in it, just accuracy. Founded in 1938 by a man named Edmund Ashford, your paternal grandfather. Passed to his son, your father, also named Edmund, in 1971. He paused. Your real name is William Edmund Ashford. You are the only child of Edmund Ashford II and the sole living heir to the Ashford family. The room felt like it had tilted 2 degrees. Not enough to fall, just enough to make everything feel wrong. That's not possible, I said. My voice cracked right down the middle. I'm a warehouse worker. I drove a forklift for 30 years. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like the neighbor's cooking. I am nobody. Stop. Harold's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for permission. Don't do that. Don't reduce yourself to what someone else's cruelty made you into. He held my gaze. You are not nobody. You never were. And the man who spent 63 years refusing to stop looking for you would be very angry to hear you say that. My chest cracked open like dry wood. He looked for me. The words came out barely above a whisper. Every single day, Harold said. In the beginning, he hired investigators. When the investigators ran out of leads, he hired more investigators. When the trails went cold, he kept the files open and waited for something new to surface. He reached into the briefcase and produced another photograph, this one more recent. The color's true, a man in his late 70s, sitting behind a large mahogany desk, silver-haired, straight-backed, wearing the kind of expression that belonged to someone who had made peace with carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time. This is your father, taken about 6 years before he passed. I took the photograph with both hands, the jaw, the set of the brow, the way the corners of his eyes folded when he wasn't quite smiling, but wasn't not smiling either. Oh God, I breathed. You see it, Harold said. I did see it. I saw it the way you see your own reflection in an unexpected mirror, that half second of not recognizing yourself before the recognition crashes in. The man in the photograph looked like me. Older, more worn, carrying weight I hadn't carried, but the bones were the same. The structure was the same. He passed away. My voice broke on the last word and I couldn't fix it. 2 years ago, Harold said gently. January 2023. Heart disease. He was 89 years old. He gave me a moment with that. He died in the same house he'd lived in his entire life. The same house you were born in. A sound came out of me that I hadn't planned. Not a sob exactly, more like the release of something that had been compressed for too long. My father had died 2 years ago. 2 years ago, he'd been alive. For 63 years, while I was driving forklifts and packing lunches and ironing dress shirts for Ryan's graduation, my father had been alive 70 miles away in the historic district of the same city. He never found me, I said. It wasn't a question. No. Harold said, his voice weighted with something that sounded like grief he'd carried long enough that it had become part of him. He never stopped looking. But no, he never found you. Not in time. He paused. That is the one thing in his life your father considered a failure. Everything else he built. Everything else he achieved. None of it mattered to him the way you did. I pressed the heel of my hand against my eye because if I didn't, I was going to come completely apart, and some stubborn remnant of a 68-year-old man who'd survived 30 years of warehouse shifts wouldn't allow that quite yet. You said he left me everything, I said, pulling my voice back under control by sheer will. What does everything mean? Harold reached into the briefcase a final time and withdrew a document thick, notarized, bound with a dark green ribbon. He set it on the bed with the quiet certainty of a man placing the last piece of a puzzle that had taken half a century to complete. It means Ashford Capital Group, he said. It means the family property in the historic district. It means the investments, the trusts, the accounts. He looked at me steadily. It means $950 million, William. All of it. Every cent. Left to you and only to you. The number landed like a physical weight. $950 million. I looked down at the crumpled note from Ryan still half visible on the bedside table. You're nothing but a burden. Harold didn't rush into it. He reached into his briefcase one more time and produced a second photograph, more recent than the first, the colors true and clear. He held it out without a word and let me take it. The man in this photograph was in his late 70s, maybe early 80s, silver-haired, straight-backed, sitting behind a wide mahogany desk with his hands folded in front of him. His face was weathered in the way of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time, not broken by it, but shaped by it the way stone gets shaped by water. His jaw was strong. His eyes were steady. His jaw was my jaw. That's him, I said. It wasn't a question. My voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. That's Edmund Ashford. Taken 6 years before he passed, Harold said. He hated having his photograph taken, but I insisted that year. I had a feeling. I couldn't stop staring at the photograph. 68 years old, and I was sitting in a hospital bed looking at my father's face for the first time. Tell me about him, I said. My throat ached with the effort of keeping my voice level. Please, tell me everything. Harold settled back in his chair, and something in his posture changed. The formal lawyer's bearing softened just slightly into something more personal, more worn. Edmund Ashford was not an easy man, he said. He was demanding, exacting, and he had very little patience for people who treated important things carelessly. But he loved with the same intensity that he brought to everything else he did, completely, without reservation, without a single exit strategy. Harold paused. Your mother, Catherine, was a school teacher from Beaufort. He proposed 3 weeks after they met. His father nearly had a heart attack. Despite the burning behind my eyes, something in my chest flickered. 3 weeks. He said he'd never understood the logic of waiting for something you were already certain about. Harold's expression warmed fractionally. You were born in September of 1957. Your mother had a difficult delivery, and afterward the doctors told him there would be no more children. He told me once that during those hours he'd been more frightened than at any other point in his life, and that when it was over and you were both safe, something in him settled permanently, like a compass finding north. His voice gentled. You were everything to him. The whole of it. My chest cracked open so quietly I almost missed it. She passed when I was 2, I said. My mother. Yes. An illness that moved quickly. He was gutted, but he had you, and so he kept going. Harold held my gaze. He raised you himself. He read to you every night. He took you to every baseball game that summer of 1961, even the late ones on weeknights, even when he had 7 a.m. board meetings the next morning. You used to fall asleep on the drive home, and he'd carry you up to bed rather than wake you. He paused. He told me that story more than once. A tear slid down my face before I could catch it. I didn't bother wiping it away. And then August of 1962, I said quietly. Harold's expression tightened. Her name was Martha Groves. She'd worked for the family for 11 years, your nanny since birth. Your father trusted her without question. His jaw set. One afternoon, while he was at a board meeting, she took you from the house, told the other staff she was bringing you to the park. You never came back. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum, trying to hold something in place that felt like it was coming loose. He called the police the same hour, Harold continued. The investigation was extensive. The Ashford name carried significant weight in Charleston. But Martha had been careful. Cash only. A forwarding address that turned out to be an empty lot. The trail went cold within 3 days. He let a beat of quiet pass. Everyone around your father told him to accept what had most likely happened. His lawyers advised him to begin estate succession planning. His friends told him that grief needed a resolution to heal. Harold looked at me steadily. He told them all in language I will not repeat in a hospital room exactly where they could put that advice. A sound tore out of me, half laugh, half something raw, and I pressed my knuckles to my mouth. He kept your room, Harold said. Exactly as it was the morning you disappeared. Your books on the shelf. A drawing you'd made of the two of you still taped to the wall above your desk. The baseball glove you'd just learned to hold that summer. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped. Every single week for 63 years, I went into that room and placed a fresh flower on your desk. Magnolias mostly, they grew in the garden, and they were your father's favorite. Your father's instructions were simple: keep the room ready. He was coming home. My shoulders shook. I didn't try to stop them. Every Monday for 63 years, Harold said quietly. Without exception, I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. The tears came fast and hot, and I let them because there was nothing left in me that wanted to hold them back. 3,276 Mondays. 3,276 times Harold had walked into that room and placed a flower on the desk of a child who didn't know his own name. Harold gave me the time. He didn't look away, didn't shift uncomfortably, didn't reach for the call button. He just sat there, with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that some moments could not and should not be hurried. When I finally pulled myself back together, I wiped my face with the back of both hands and looked at Harold with everything I had left. He never remarried, I said. Did he? No, Harold said simply. He had his work. He had his search for you. And he had a belief that everyone around him considered irrational, that you were alive somewhere, and that one day he would find you. He held my gaze with the steady certainty of a man who had watched that belief prove itself true. I joined the Ashford household in 1978. I became his chief legal counsel in 1989. And in all the years I knew him, I never once heard him say he had given up. I looked down at the bracelet on my wrist, the same bracelet on the wrist of the little boy in the first photograph, the same one Edmund Ashford had put there before the world went wrong. How did you find me? I asked. After all this time, how did you actually find me? Harold's expression shifted into something more careful, more measured. It starts with a letter, he said. Delivered to the estate in the spring of 2008. No return address. Written by someone who had spent 46 years carrying a secret that had become too heavy to die with. My breath caught. Who? Harold looked at me without blinking. Martha Groves, he said. Written from a hospice bed in Savannah, 3 weeks before she died. Martha Groves, I repeated. The name tasted strange in my mouth, like something that had been sitting in the dark for a very long time and had finally been brought into the light. The woman who had taken me from my father's house when I was 4 years old. The woman whose face I didn't remember, whose voice I couldn't recall, who had deposited me at St. Andrew's Children's Home like a package with the wrong address and walked away. She wrote to you, I said. In the spring of 2008, Harold confirmed. No return address on the envelope, but the postmark was Savannah. The letter was 2 pages handwritten, and it began with the words, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want to tell the truth before I can't anymore. My jaw tightened. What did she say? She confessed everything. Harold's voice was measured, but something cold ran underneath it. She admitted to taking you from the house. She gave the name of the children's home in North Charleston, St. Andrews, and the false name she'd registered you under. Joseph Carter. He paused. She said she'd thought about writing that letter for 40 years. She said she'd talked herself out of it every time because she was afraid of what would happen to her. But she was dying, and apparently dying makes a person recalibrate their priorities. Did she say why? I pressed my voice harder than I intended. Why she did it in the first place? Harold nodded slowly. Money. A man paid her someone with a business interest in destabilizing the Ashford estate, while Edmund had no heir. We were never able to conclusively identify who. Martha didn't know his real name, only a cash payment and a phone number that had been disconnected for 30 years by the time I looked into it. He met my eyes. She said she'd spent every year since trying to convince herself it had been the right decision, that you were better off, that you'd been placed with a good family. His expression hardened fractionally. She clearly hadn't checked. The bitterness in my chest flared hot and fast, and I pressed my back teeth together until it subsided. So you had the letter, I said, but you still couldn't find me. The letter gave me the starting point, Harold said. St. Andrew's Children's Home, North Charleston, sometime in August of 1962. A boy registered as Joseph Carter. He exhaled slowly. But St. Andrew's closed in 1981. Their records, intake files, placement documents, everything had been destroyed in a fire in 1978, 3 years before the closure. He spread his hands slightly. There was nothing left on paper. Then how? I spent 8 years tracking down former staff members, Harold said. People who had worked at St. Andrews between 1962 and 1978. Most had moved away. Several had passed. A few remembered very little children came and went, and after 50 years, the individual faces blurred together. He leaned forward slightly, and something changed in his expression, the focused look of a man describing the one thread that had held. In 2016, I found a woman named Dorothy Reeves. She was 89 years old, living in a care facility outside of Columbia. She had worked as a junior intake coordinator at St. Andrews from 1960 to 1971. My breath slowed. She remembered a child being brought in during the summer of 1962, Harold continued. Not the face, she was honest about that. But she remembered something unusual. The woman who brought the child in, described as nervous, middle-aged, well-dressed, had been insistent about one thing. He looked at me steadily. She said, "Don't take the bracelet off him. Whatever else happens, leave the bracelet." The air left my lungs. Dorothy remembered it because it was strange, Harold said. Children arrived with almost nothing. A piece of silver jewelry was notable, and the instruction to leave it on that stuck with her. He glanced at my wrist. Once I had that detail, I narrowed the search considerably. A man in his late 50s or early 60s raised in or around North Charleston with a silver bracelet bearing an unusual crest. He paused. It still took 3 more years, but in February of this year, your name appeared in the Trident Medical Center System Emergency Admission Head Trauma Next of Kin listed as Ryan Carter. He looked at me without blinking. I drove to the hospital that same night. I saw the bracelet through the glass of the ICU window, and I sat in the parking lot and waited for you to wake up. I exhaled long and unsteady, like a man who'd been holding his breath for 3 years without knowing it. She couldn't even take it off me, I said roughly. Martha. She took everything else and she couldn't take the bracelet. No, Harold said. She couldn't. He held my gaze, and that is why you are sitting here today. I pressed my fingers against my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. When I lowered my hand, Harold was watching me with the careful attention of someone who knew the next part of what he had to say was going to land differently than everything before it. There's something else, he said. His voice shifted, the warmth of the previous hour pulling back, replaced by something more deliberate. Something about Ryan that I haven't told you yet. He reached for his briefcase and set it on his knee, hands resting on the clasp. And I need you to be ready, William. Because what I'm about to show you is not the story of a son who panicked. It's the story of something that was planned. My stomach dropped 6 inches. Show me, I said. Harold opened the briefcase with the unhurried precision of a man who had done difficult things for a long time and had learned that speed never made them easier. He withdrew a manila folder thick with documents and set it on the bedside table between us. On the cover in neat black ink, 2 words had been written, Ryan Carter. Let's start with the money, he said. He opened the folder and slid a bank statement across to me, a printout highlighted in yellow rows of transactions organized by date. I recognized the account number immediately. It was mine. The savings account I'd built over 20 years of double shifts and careful living, $47,000 that I'd never touched because I was always saving it for something that actually mattered. Your account shows a 0 balance as of March 19th, Harold said. 10 days ago, while you were in the ICU, the withdrawals were made in 7 separate transactions over 5 days. Small enough amounts each time to avoid triggering the bank's automatic fraud alert, large enough that the account was emptied within the week. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. Ryan, the withdrawals were made from ATMs and in-branch transactions at 3 different locations across Charleston, Harold said, pointing to each highlighted line in turn. All within a 15-mile radius of Ryan's home address. He looked up. I had a forensic accountant review the records. There is no other reasonable interpretation. He took $47,000, I said flatly, while I was in a coma. Yes. Harold held my gaze without flinching. Every cent. Something burned at the back of my throat, not tears this time. Something drier, harder. Harold slid the second document across. A real estate transaction record stamped and notarized dated March 18th, 1 day before the last bank withdrawal. Property address, my apartment building on Fernwood Drive, North Charleston. Sale price, $155,000, $70,000 below current market value. Seller Joseph Carter, represented by Ryan Carter, under power of attorney. I stared at the words. Power of attorney, I said slowly. That means Ryan had legal authority to sell my home on my behalf. It means he claimed to, Harold said, his voice sharpening. A power of attorney is a legal document that grants one person the authority to act on another person's behalf, signing contracts, managing finances, making legal decisions. It requires the signature of the person granting that authority witnessed and notarized. He reached into the folder again and produced a separate sheet, the POA document itself, my supposed signature at the bottom. Beside it, a second sheet, a forensic handwriting analysis report, 3 pages long, concluding with a finding of 94% certainty that the signature was forged. "He forged it," I said. "He forged it," Harold confirmed. "Fabricated the document, found a notary we're still investigating how, and used it to sell your home while you were unconscious in this building." He paused. "Forging a power of attorney in South Carolina is a felony. It carries up to 5 years in prison." The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago. "And the buyer?" I said, eyes dropping back to the transaction record. "Amber Carter." I looked up. "His wife. Your daughter-in-law," Harold said. "Ryan and Amber Carter have been married for 4 years. They live in West Ashley." He let a beat pass. "He sold your home to his own wife. Using your money as the down payment, the withdrawals from your savings account funded the purchase. In effect, he used your $47,000 to buy your $155,000 home, transferred it to Amber's name at a loss, and left you with nothing." Harold's voice was steady, but the expression behind his eyes was not. "The net result is that you woke up from a coma with no home, no savings, and nowhere to go." I pressed my fist against my mouth. My eyes burned hot and fierce, and for a moment the anger was so sharp it crowded out everything else. "She's not just the wife," I said. "Is she?" Harold reached for the next document in the folder without hesitation. A printed series of text messages recovered through a legal preservation order on Ryan's phone records, each exchange dated and time-stamped. "Amber Carter is a paralegal," Harold said. "She has working knowledge of property law, estate planning, and financial documentation." He pointed to the first message exchange dated 8 months earlier, November of last year. "This is the beginning of the conversation." I leaned forward and read, "Amber, you need to look at your father's finances more carefully. Old men who work that long always have something put away. Ryan, he's got some savings, nothing major. Amber, it's not about the amount. It's about what you're entitled to when he's gone. You've been supporting him for years. Ryan, I haven't really. Amber, you've been emotionally responsible for him. That counts. Start paying attention." I read the next exchange, then the next. Each one slightly further along the same road, Amber steering and Ryan following, the language shifting incrementally from vague resentment to specific planning. By January of this year, they were discussing the apartment's market value. By February, Ryan was asking Amber how power of attorney documents worked. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. "She drove this," I said, my voice rough and low. "From the beginning, she drove this. She provided the direction," Harold said carefully. "Ryan made the choices. But yes, the architecture of what was done to you financially was built on a foundation that Amber Carter laid brick by brick over the course of 8 months." He looked at me steadily. "She is not a passive participant." I set the papers down before I crumpled them. "Is that everything?" I asked. My voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that has nothing peaceful in it. Harold reached into the briefcase one final time. He set a USB drive on the table between us, small, black, ordinary-looking. "No," he said, "it isn't." Harold picked up the USB drive, crossed to the small desk beneath the window, and opened his laptop with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything else. The afternoon light had shifted while we'd been talking, longer shadows, now the sun dropping behind the line of buildings outside the room, settling into that particular late afternoon quiet that hospitals get when the busiest part of the day has passed. He plugged in the drive. He didn't say anything yet. He just turned the screen toward me and pulled his chair around so we were both facing it. "Before I show you this," he said, "I need to give you some context. When I discovered that Ryan Carter was employed at Ashford Capital, which happened about 4 months ago while I was still narrowing my search for you, I hired a private investigator to monitor his activities. Standard practice in estate matters involving unknown heirs and potential complications." He paused. "The PI flagged something in late February. Ryan had visited your apartment building on 2 separate occasions within the same week outside of his normal pattern. The second visit was captured on the building's exterior security camera, a camera that covers the main stairwell entrance. My mouth went dry. Harold clicked the first file. The footage was grainy but workable, the kind of quality you get from a mid-range security system, good enough to make out faces, good enough to read body language. The timestamp in the corner read March 10th, 2025, 7:14 p.m. The angle covered the second-floor landing of my apartment building's interior stairwell, looking down at the first flight of stairs from above. Ryan walked into frame from the left. He was wearing a gray athletic jacket, dark pants, a baseball cap pulled low. He carried a small backpack over one shoulder. He moved quickly at first, the walk of a man who knew where he was going and didn't want to be seen lingering. He reached the second-floor landing, glanced up toward the camera without appearing to notice it, then crouched down beside the stairwell railing. "That railing," Harold said quietly, "runs along the right side of the first-floor staircase. It's the one you use every time you climb those stairs." I watched my son unzip the front pocket of his backpack and remove a small tool, a screwdriver. He worked quickly, efficiently, not the fumbling movements of someone improvising, but the practiced motions of someone who had figured out exactly what they needed to do before they arrived. He applied the screwdriver to the base bracket of the railing, where the upright post connected to the concrete wall. He didn't remove the screws entirely. He loosened them enough that the bracket shifted slightly when he tested it with his palm, enough that the railing looked completely normal to anyone walking past, but would give way under any meaningful downward pressure. He stood. He checked his work one more time with a casual testing push, nodded slightly to himself, zipped his backpack, walked out of frame. The whole thing took 4 minutes and 23 seconds. My hands were gripping the bed rail so hard, my knuckles had gone white. I didn't realize I was doing it until the metal edge started to cut into my palm. "He knew," I said. My voice came out scraped hollow, like something had been dragged through it. "He knew about the vertigo. You'd mentioned it to him multiple times," Harold said. "You'd asked him twice in the previous month to help you tighten that railing because you'd noticed it was becoming unstable. He told you he'd get to it." Harold's voice was flat and very controlled. "He didn't get to it. He made it worse. The fury that moved through me was so complete it didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like something structural, like the ground shifting beneath a building, quiet and total and impossible to stop." "Show me the rest," I said. Harold clicked the second file. Same stairwell. Different timestamp. March 13th, 2025, 6:47 p.m. 3 days after the first footage. I watched myself walk into frame. It was strange, profoundly, uncomfortably strange to watch your own body moving through a space 3 days before your life changed irrevocably. I looked older on camera than I thought of myself. I moved carefully the way I'd learned to move over years of managing the vertigo, one hand on the wall, weight shifted slightly inward, not rushing. I reached the base of the staircase and extended my right hand toward the railing. Harold stopped the video right there. "I won't make you watch what comes next," he said. "You were there for it. I was grateful for that." I remembered enough. The railing coming away in my hand, not gradually, not with any warning, just instantly gone, the support I'd been depending on dissolving in the same moment I'd committed my weight to it. The world tilting. The concrete edge of the step catching the side of my skull with a sound I'd heard from the inside. 10 days of nothing after that. "What's the legal designation?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. "For what he did." "What do they call it?" "In South Carolina, intentionally creating dangerous conditions with knowledge of a specific victim's vulnerability and with documented financial motive can be charged as reckless endangerment causing great bodily harm," Harold said. "Depending on what the full evidence picture looks like by the time a prosecutor reviews it, It could reach as far as attempted murder. He held my gaze. The video, combined with what I'll show you next, makes the attempted murder argument significantly stronger. Something in my chest seized up so hard it felt like a physical blow. "There's more," I said. "There's more," Harold confirmed. He reached into the briefcase and withdrew a thick manila envelope, a corporate logo embossed in the corner, the name of a national insurance company printed in dark blue ink. He set it between us. "Ryan applied for a life insurance policy," he said. "The insured party was you. The beneficiary was himself." He paused, letting that land. He applied for it on February 25th, 16 days before he loosened that railing. The breath left my body in a slow, controlled exhale that I held onto for as long as I could, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to let into the room yet. "How much?" I asked. Harold opened the envelope and placed the policy document face up on the bed. $750,000. The number sat on the page like a verdict. $750,000. Ryan had decided that was what my life was worth, and had gone through the administrative process of formalizing that calculation 16 days before he made sure the railing would fail. "He needed my signature," I said. My voice was very quiet. "To take out a policy on my life, the insured party has to sign the application. I never signed anything like this." "No," Harold said. "You didn't." He reached into the folder and produced a second document, the signature page of the insurance application, a neat line at the bottom above the words "Signature of Insured." "This is what was submitted to the insurance company as your signature." He placed it beside a third sheet, a forensic analysis report from a handwriting expert, 4 pages dense with technical language and comparison diagrams, concluding on the final page with a finding stated in plain terms: the signature on the insurance application did not match authenticated samples of Joseph Carter's handwriting. Confidence level 96.8%. "Insurance fraud," I said. "First-degree insurance fraud in South Carolina carries up to 10 years, Harold said. "Combined with the forged power of attorney from last week, Ryan is looking at multiple felony charges before we've even addressed the staircase." He paused. "But I want you to understand something, William. Individually, each of these things is serious. Together, they form a pattern, and patterns are what prosecutors use to establish intent." I looked at the signature. That wasn't mine. Someone had sat down and practiced my handwriting, had studied how I formed my letters, had reproduced it carefully enough to pass a non-expert review. The deliberateness of it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. "He sat somewhere and practiced forging my name," I said. "Or Amber did," Harold said. He reached for the final section of the folder, a printed sequence of text messages longer than the ones he'd shown me in the previous hour, spanning a period from November of last year through early March. He laid them out in order 3 pages and pointed to where I should begin reading. I read. The early messages I'd already seen Amber steering Ryan toward his father's finances, the gradual architecture of resentment being built into something more purposeful. But these continued past, where Harold had stopped before. Amber. January 14th. The life insurance is the cleanest option. If something happens to him naturally, you collect. No questions. Ryan. He's not that old. He could live another 20 years. Amber. He won't if his health keeps declining. You said the vertigo is getting worse. A wave of nausea moved through me so fast, I had to press my hand flat against my sternum. Ryan, February 3rd. The railing on his staircase is loose. Has been for months. I keep meaning to fix it. Amber, don't. 2 words. That was all. Don't. And then 4 days later, Amber, get the policy done this week. Before anything changes. Ryan, you think this is actually going to work? Amber, he uses that railing every single time he goes upstairs. You told me that yourself. Just make sure it stays the way it is. My vision blurred. Not from tears, from the sheer nauseating clarity of what I was reading. This was not a moment of weakness. This was not panic or desperation or a bad decision made in a crisis. This was a conversation, a plan, a thing that had been discussed over dinner tables and in bed at night, typed out on phones while the television played in the background, normalized into something as mundane as scheduling a dentist appointment. They had planned my death the way ordinary people plan a vacation. She told him not to fix the railing, I said. My voice had dropped to something I barely recognized. She knew. She knew exactly what leaving it loose would do to me, and she told him to leave it. Yes, Harold said, and the insurance policy was her idea. The text record suggests it originated with her, yes. I set the pages down. My hands were trembling, not the fine tremor of cold or fatigue, but the deep bone-level shaking of someone whose body is trying to process something the mind hasn't fully accepted yet. She sat across my dinner table, I said. At Christmas, 2 years ago, she brought a pie. My throat constricted painfully around the words. I thought she was good for him. I told Ryan I was glad he'd found someone steady. I know, Harold said, and the gentleness in his voice made it worse somehow, made the whole thing more real, more solid, more impossible to step back from. I pressed both hands over my face and breathed slow and deliberate, the way you breathe when you're trying to hold the shape of yourself together against pressure that wants to take it apart. When I lowered my hands, my jaw was set, and my eyes were dry, and something in my chest had gone very still the way a storm goes still at its center. What do we do now? I asked. I can have everything on that table in front of a Charleston PD detective within the hour, Harold said. Ryan would be arrested by tonight. Amber likely within 48 hours depending on the warrant timeline. He held my gaze. That is one option. What's the other option? Harold looked at me steadily. Ryan works at Ashford Capital. He has worked there for 6 years, earning a salary from your family's company, sitting in meetings in a building that bears your father's name, not knowing any of it. He paused. You are the legal owner of that company. You have the right to walk into that building as its rightful head. And if you choose to do that before the police are called in front of every executive, every employee, every person who has watched Ryan Carter build his career on ground that was never his, then Ryan doesn't just face criminal charges. Harold's voice was measured, but his eyes were sharp. He faces the complete and public collapse of everything he thought he had, with nowhere to hide and no story left to tell. The image of it formed fully in my mind, Ryan, in that building, comfortable and unknowing, and then the doors opening. From a legal standpoint, Harold continued, presenting the evidence in that setting before credible witnesses, including board members and potentially press, actually strengthens the criminal case. It creates a documented public record of his response. Prosecutors favor that. He held my gaze. It is not just justice, William. It is the smarter legal strategy. I reached out and picked up the photograph of Edmund Ashford from the bed beside me, the one Harold had shown me hours ago, the silver-haired man at the mahogany desk who had spent 63 years keeping a room ready. My father had never gotten to see this moment, but I was going to make sure Ryan understood exactly what he had thrown away. Schedule the board meeting, I said. I want every executive in that room. I set the photograph back down. And Harold, not a word to the police until after I walked through those doors. Harold held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, reached for his phone, and began to dial. I walked out of Trident Medical Center on a Tuesday morning wearing the same clothes I'd been admitted in. A nurse named Linda, the same one who had handed me tissues on the worst morning of my life, had washed and folded them while I was in the ICU. She left them on the chair beside my bed without making a thing of it. I didn't get a chance to thank her properly. She was already down the hall with someone else who needed her more. The morning air hit my face the moment the automatic doors slid open, and I stopped on the concrete apron outside the entrance just for a moment, just to feel it. March in Charleston. Not cold, not warm, that particular in-between temperature that the Low Country does better than anywhere else. The air carrying the faint salt edge of the harbor, mixed with something green and growing. I breathed it in slowly, deliberately, the way you breathe when you've just been reminded that breathing is not a thing to take for granted. Harold was waiting beside a black sedan at the curb. He opened the rear door without ceremony. "How are you feeling?" he asked, like a man who spent 10 days in a coma and then spent the next 18 hours having his entire life explained to him. I said, "So, various." Harold almost smiled. "That's fair. I got in." The leather seat was warmer than the outside air, the interior smelling of cedar and something clean. Harold took the front passenger seat, and a driver I hadn't met, a quiet man in his 50s named George, who Harold introduced briefly as the estate's head of household transport, pulled smoothly into traffic. We drove south through North Charleston first. My neighborhood. I watched it pass through the window, the warehouse district where I'd worked for 30 years, the dollar store on Fernwood, where I'd bought Ryan's school supplies every August, the diner on Rivers Avenue where I'd eaten Saturday breakfast alone for the last 5 years, since Ryan stopped coming. Ordinary weathered known. The landscape of a life I'd built without knowing it wasn't mine. "You're going to feel like a stranger there at first," Harold said, watching me watch the window. "At the manor. That's normal. Give it time." "How long did it take you," I asked, "to feel at home there yourself?" Harold considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. "About 2 years," he said. And I wasn't carrying 63 years of somewhere else. The scenery changed as we crossed into the peninsula. The streets narrowed and quieted. The buildings grew older and more deliberate. The trees bigger. Live oaks draped in Spanish moss that moved in the March breeze like slow, unhurried breath. Historic District Charleston, a part of the city I'd driven through 100 times without ever stopping, always feeling in some vague and unexamined way that it wasn't meant for me. George turned onto a private lane I'd never noticed before, easy to miss set between 2 high garden walls, no signage. He slowed as we approached a pair of tall iron gates, black ornate, the metalwork forming a repeating pattern of leaves, and what I now recognized as the Ashford crest at the center of each gate. A brass plate on the right pillar read simply, "Ashford Manor Est, 1887. The gates opened as we approached. "Electronic," Harold said, seeing me look. "Your father had them automated in the 90s. He said the manual chain was undignified for a man of his age." A beat. He was 58 at the time. The lane beyond the gates was lined with mature live oaks on both sides, their canopies meeting overhead to form a natural tunnel of green and gray. Afternoon light filtered through in broken patterns across the dark asphalt. At the end of the lane, the house came into view. My breath caught. I'd passed Ashford Capitol on Meeting Street enough times to know the family had money. But knowing a family has money and seeing where they lived are 2 entirely different things. The manor was 3 stories, white-painted brick black shutters flanking every window, a wide front portico supported by 4 fluted columns that had been standing longer than my grandparents had been alive. The proportions were everything the word historic implied. Not ostentatious, not trying to impress, simply built by people who intended the thing to outlast them by several generations and had engineered it accordingly. A formal garden stretched across the front, centered on a circular drive, and a marble fountain that was running the water, catching the late morning light in small, bright fragments. George stopped the car at the base of the front steps. When I stepped out, I found 8 people arranged in 2 lines flanking the entrance, 4 on each side dressed in neat dark uniforms, standing with the quiet, composed attention of people who took their work seriously. A woman at the front of the left line, the oldest of them, with silver hair pulled back, and the bearing of someone who had run a large household for decades, stepped forward. "Welcome home, Mr. Ashford," she said. Her name, Harold told me quietly, was Mrs. Patricia Holt, head of household for 22 years. We've been waiting a long time for this day. My throat tightened without warning, and I had to swallow hard twice before I could answer. Thank you, I managed. I appreciate that more than you know. Harold guided me up the stone steps and through the front door, wide, dark-stained wood, the brass hardware polished to a mirror finish into the entrance hall. The first thing I noticed was the floor, black and white marble, in a geometric pattern worn smooth in the center, where decades of footsteps had passed. The second thing was the ceiling-high plasterwork cornice running the perimeter, a chandelier hanging at the center that was turned off at this hour, its crystal drops catching the daylight from the flanking windows and scattering it in small moving points across the walls. The third thing was the photographs. They lined both walls of the entrance hall in dark wooden frames arranged chronologically, from the front door to the back, a visual history of the Ashford family, spanning more than a century. Formal portraits, candid shots, group photographs at what appeared to be company milestones. Edmund as a young man, sharp-eyed and already authoritative. Edmund with a woman I understood without needing to ask. Was my mother Catherine, laughing at something outside the frame, her head tilted back, looking more alive in that frozen moment than most people looked in motion. I moved slowly along the wall, hands at my sides, not touching anything. And then I found it. Near the center of the right-hand wall at eye level in a frame slightly larger than the ones surrounding it, a photograph of a little boy, 4 or 5 years old, standing in the morning light of a garden I now recognized as the one outside. He was squinting into the sun. He was grinning. On his right wrist, catching the light, the bracelet. My bracelet. I reached up and pressed my fingertips to the glass, very lightly, and the contact, cool, hard, real, sent something moving through me that I couldn't have named if I'd tried. He put it there himself, Harold said from behind me. Center of the wall, eye level. He said it was so he'd see it every morning when he came downstairs. His voice was careful, steady, carrying something large inside it. He saw it every morning for 63 years, William. My eyes burned hot and fierce, and I blinked hard against it. Take me upstairs, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I want to see the rest of it. Harold nodded. He led me toward the staircase, broad, curving the banister, worn smooth, where hands had rested on it for 130 years. At the top, a long hallway stretched in both directions. He turned right toward the far end, where the corridor ended at a single door. A bough of fresh magnolia had been laid across the threshold. White flowers just opened. Harold stopped in front of the door and turned to face me. "Are you ready?" he asked. My heart was knocking so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pressed my hand flat against my chest for a moment, steadying, grounding, and then I nodded. "Open it," I said. The hinges didn't creak. I noticed that immediately the door swung open on perfectly maintained hardware, smooth and silent. The kind of maintenance that doesn't happen by accident. Someone had oiled those hinges regularly. Someone had cared about this door for a long time. The scent reached me before my eyes fully adjusted to the room, old wood and dried paper. The particular stillness of a space that has been preserved rather than simply kept, and underneath it all, fresh flowers, the magnolia from the threshold. Yes, but also something else, something that had been in this room long enough to become part of it. Then the room came into focus. It was smaller than I'd imagined. Not a grand nursery, just a child's bedroom, the kind that belongs to a boy who played hard and read a lot, and hadn't yet outgrown the need to keep everything within reach. A single bed against the left wall, neatly made with a navy coverlet that had faded slightly along the edges from decades of light exposure. A wooden bookshelf running floor to ceiling on the right, packed with children's books, their spines sun-softened and cracked from used titles I couldn't read from the doorway, but knew somehow had been favorites. A small desk beneath the window, its surface bare except for a pencil cup, a spelling primer, and placed at the exact center of the desk, a single white magnolia blossom in a small glass of water, fully open, completely fresh. and above the desk, taped to the wall with yellowed tape that had been carefully reapplied along the edges to keep it from falling, a drawing. Crayon on white paper. Two figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side in front of a house with 4 windows and a sun in the corner. Beneath the figures, in the large, uneven lettering of a child who had recently learned to write. Me and Daddy. My knees went weak so fast I had to put one hand on the door frame to stay upright. "Come in," Harold said gently. "It's yours." I crossed the threshold slowly, like a man entering somewhere sacred, and I suppose that's what it was. My shoes made no sound on the wooden floor. I moved to the desk and stood in front of it, in front of the drawing, in front of those 2 crayon figures, the tall one and the small one, and I understood in a way that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to something deeper and older and more fundamental, that the small figure was me. I had drawn this. These were my hands that had pressed these crayons to this paper, my mouth that had said to someone, to Edmund, to my father, "Daddy, look what I made." And he had kept it. For 63 years, through everything, he had kept it on this wall. "The flowers," I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "You placed one every week." "Every Monday morning," Harold said. He stood just inside the doorway, his hands folded, his voice very careful. "Your father's instructions were to keep the room ready, to maintain it as though you might walk through the door any day." A pause. I interpreted ready to mean alive. A room with fresh flowers in it is alive. A room without them is a museum. I turned to face him, and my eyes were burning so fiercely I couldn't pretend otherwise. "How many times?" I asked. "How many times did you walk into this room?" 3,276, Harold said. "Mondays. Give or take a handful of weeks when illness or travel prevented it, which I made up for the following week." He held my gaze with the steadiness of a man who had long since made his peace with what he was saying. I never missed a month. The sob that moved through me came from somewhere I hadn't known, was there below grief, below loss, below even the anger of the morning and the revelations of the afternoon. It came from the place where a child lives inside every adult, the place that had spent 63 years not knowing. It had a father who lit a candle and kept a room ready and put a drawing on the wall and never, not once, stopped believing. I pressed both palms over my face and let it move through me. I couldn't have stopped it if I'd wanted to, and I didn't want to. Harold gave me the space of it, without flinching, without moving, without filling the silence with anything that would have made it smaller. When I finally lowered my hands, my face was wet, and my chest ached with something that was not entirely pain. I pulled the desk chair out and sat down in the chair that had once been mine at the desk where I had once sat and practiced letters and drawn pictures of my father and myself. And I looked at Harold. "Sit down," I said. "Oh, please." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed I had slept in before everything went wrong, and looked at me with the patient attention of a man who understood that the next thing I was going to say was important. "You said last night that Ryan's actions were planned," I said. "Not panic, not desperation, planned." I held his gaze. "I need you to tell me everything now, not the financial records, not the insurance. I need to know what Ryan knew about who I am, about this family, about this house." My voice hardened at the edges. "Because a man who panics abandons his father in a hospital. A man who plans something buys an insurance policy first." I leaned forward. "So tell me, when did he know?" Harold's expression shifted. The gentleness of the last few minutes pulled back, replaced by something more measured, more serious. "That," he said, "is the part of this story that changes everything about how you understand what he did." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a single folded sheet, a timeline I realized printed and annotated in Harold's neat hand. Ryan Carter discovered your real identity, Harold said, in January of 2023, 2 years and 3 months ago. He placed the sheet on the desk in front of me, and from that day forward, every decision he made was shaped by one question. He looked at me steadily. How do I make sure my father never finds out? The room felt like it had contracted around me. The ceiling lower, the walls closer. The faded crayon drawing on the wall suddenly the sharpest thing in my field of vision. He knew, I said. The words felt like stones dropping into still water. He knew who I was. He sat at my table and called me on my birthday and came to my apartment for Thanksgiving, and he knew. Yes, Harold said. He knew. The anger that rose in me then was different from everything that had come before, colder, quieter, and so much more total. Tell me how, I said. Tell me exactly how he found out. Harold unfolded the sheet. It started, he said, with your bracelet. The morning after I first stepped into that untouched childhood bedroom, I did not sleep. I sat in the leather armchair by the window, watching the live oak trees outside sway in the March wind, their Spanish moss trailing like silver curtains in the dark. My chest would not stop hurting, not from the fall, not from the coma, but from the weight of everything Harold had told me in that room. When dawn came, Harold was already waiting for me at the long mahogany table in the study, 2 cups of coffee steaming between a stack of manila folders and a single yellow legal pad covered in tight, precise handwriting. He pushed 1 cup toward me the moment I sat down. You didn't rest, he said, not a question. How could I? My voice came out rougher than I expected, scraped raw. You told me my son knew who I really was. You told me he knew for over 2 years and said nothing. I need to understand every single step of what he did. Harold set down his coffee, folded his hands on the table, and held my gaze with those steady gray eyes of his. Then let me walk you through it, all of it, from the beginning. He opened the first folder and slid it across to me. Inside was a photograph, a printout slightly grainy, taken from what looked like security camera footage. The image showed Ryan younger looking than I'd seen him recently, standing inside what appeared to be a storage unit. He was holding something small up toward the light. My stomach dropped. I leaned in closer. Is that your bracelet? Harold confirmed, his voice measured and even. Or rather, a photograph of it. He took that image on January 14th, 2023, 2 years and 3 months ago. I pressed my fist to my sternum like I could physically stop my heart from cracking. How did he even find it? You had it in a tin box, Harold said carefully. In the back of the closet at your North Charleston house. Ryan was helping you sort through some things after you had a mild dizzy spell. Do you remember? You asked him to bring down some old papers. I did remember. I closed my eyes for a second, and the memory surfaced with awful clarity, me sitting on the couch, head still spinning, telling Ryan which box to grab. I had not thought twice about it. He was my son. I trusted him with my home, my belongings, my entire small life. He found the tin, I said, my voice hollow. He found the tin, Harold repeated, and inside it was the bracelet and the single photograph of you as a child that Martha had apparently kept and left with you at the orphanage. He recognized the Ashford family crest engraved on the bracelet. Immediately he had seen it before. I jerked my head up. He'd seen it before. Harold's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Ryan had been working at Ashford Capital Group for 4 years at that point, a position Amber had specifically encouraged him to pursue 2 years into their relationship, after she had researched the firm's ownership structure and noted the unresolved estate. He was Senior Vice President of Portfolio Management. The Ashford family crest appears on the company letterhead on the lobby wall on every official document he had handled for 4 years. He tapped the folder. He knew exactly what that crest meant. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table to stop them, but the trembling went all the way up my arms. So he looked at that bracelet and he knew. He knew the crest. He did not yet know what it meant in relation to you. Harold paused, letting the precision of that distinction land. So he did what a calculating man does. He researched, quietly, carefully over several weeks. He cross-referenced the orphanage records, what little public record existed before the 1978 fire, with Ashford Capital's historical filings. He found a reference to Edmund Ashford's missing son, the open estate, the standing search. And then he understood. My throat tightened until I could barely push the words out. He understood that his own father, the man he called a burden, was the heir to almost $1 billion. Yes. Harold's voice was quiet but iron underneath. And instead of coming to you, instead of picking up the phone and saying, "Dad, I think you need to hear something," he went home that night and told his wife. The air went out of me. My eyes burned hot and fierce, and I pressed my knuckles hard against my lips to hold back something that was not quite a sob and not quite a scream. "Amber," I managed. "Amber." Harold pulled out a second document, printed text messages, page after page, time-stamped and highlighted in yellow. These were recovered from Ryan's personal device by the forensic investigator I engaged in February 2025. The first message is dated January 21st, 2023, 1 week after Ryan photographed the bracelet. He pointed to a highlighted line. I forced myself to read it. Ryan found something. The old man might be worth more than we thought. A lot more. Amber, define a lot more. Ryan, try 950 million. Amber. Are you serious right now? Ryan, dead serious. But only if he claims it. We need to make sure he never does. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles going white, my breath coming in short, jagged pulls. My own son. 8 words. We need to make sure he never does. 8 words that set into motion everything: the stolen savings, the forged POA, the sold house, the loosened bolts on a stair railing, and a man lying in a coma for 10 days, wondering why no one came. My eyes filled. I did not bother trying to stop it this time. One tear, then another, sliding hot down my face while I stared at those words on the page. He chose the money, I said, and my voice broke on the last word. He chose it over me. Harold reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His grip was firm and steady, the way you hold someone who is standing at the edge of something they cannot come back from. "Mr. Ashford," he said, and the name still sent a jolt through my chest every single time. "What your son chose, that is on him. What happens next, that is entirely up to you." He reached into the bottom of the folder and set a cream-colored envelope on the table between us. The paper was aged to the color of old honey, and across the front, in handwriting I had never seen before, were 3 words. "For my William. This belonged to your father," Harold said. "Edmund wrote it in the last week of his life. He asked me to give it to you when you were ready to fight." I stared at that envelope for a long time before I touched it. My fingertips hovered above the aged paper, as if the warmth of my father's handwriting might still be there, some residual heat from the hand that had pressed a pen to that page, knowing he would never see my face again. Finally, Harold spoke. "You don't have to open it right now," he said, his voice low and unhurried. "But I need you to understand something before we go any further. If you want to reclaim what is yours legally, publicly, and permanently, we need to act within the next 3 weeks." I set the envelope gently to one side, pressing my palm flat against it for just a moment. Then I straightened in my chair, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and forced myself to focus. "Tell me everything." Harold pulled the yellow legal pad to the center of the table, and for the next several seconds, the only sound in the room was the scratch of his pen, underlining what he had already written. Then he looked up. "The DNA results came back 48 hours ago from the private laboratory in Colombia," he began. "Full genomic match. You are Edmund Ashford's biological son. That result is notarized, certified, and admissible in any South Carolina court. He slid a sealed document toward me bearing a red official stamp. That is your identity restored in the eyes of the law. I picked it up with both hands. They were still trembling slightly. I could feel it, but I held the document steady by sheer will. And the estate. The will was filed with Charleston County Probate Court in March 2022, 8 months before Edmund passed, Harold said. It names, quote, my biological son, William Edmund Ashford, as sole heir to all personal assets, real property, and controlling interest in Ashford Capital Group. The DNA confirmation triggers immediate activation of the estate transfer. He paused, letting that weight settle fully before he continued. In plain terms, as of 48 hours ago, you are the legal owner of Ashford Capital Group, Ashford Manor, and an estate currently valued at $950 million. The number hit me in the chest like a physical blow every time I heard it. I exhaled slowly through my teeth. And Ryan. Harold's jaw set. Ryan Carter holds his senior vice president position under a standard employment contract that contains a fraud clause and a morality clause. The moment we present evidence of criminal conduct to the board, that contract is void, and he can be removed immediately, no severance, no appeal period. He tapped the stack of folders. We have that evidence. The question is how we present it. I leaned forward. Walk me through it. For the next hour, Harold laid out the architecture of a plan that he had clearly been building for weeks. He spread documents across the table like a general arranging a battlefield. The bank statements showing the $47,000 withdrawal, the real estate deed. In Amber's name, the forensic handwriting analysis of the forged power of attorney, the USB drive, with the security footage of Ryan on that staircase, and the insurance policy with the fraudulent signature flagged at 94% certainty. We do not go to the police first, Harold explained, his tone firm. If we go to the police first, Ryan's attorney files for a stay, freezes the estate proceedings, and we could be tied up in probate court for 12 to 18 months, while Ryan continues drawing his salary from your company. His finger landed on the legal pad where he had written 2 words in capital letters, board meeting. We go to the board first. You walk into Ashford Capital as William Ashford, heir and legal owner of controlling interest. You present the DNA confirmation, the will, and the evidence of fraud in that order in front of every board member and senior executive simultaneously. Ryan will be in that room. He attends every Thursday board meeting. My pulse surged. This Thursday, Harold confirmed. He looked at me steadily. That gives us 3 days to prepare. After the board meeting, the Charleston PD White-Collar Crimes Unit will be waiting in the lobby with warrants already in hand. We coordinate the timing so that Ryan cannot leave the building. I pushed back from the table and stood needing to move, needing to feel my legs under me. I walked to the window and pressed one hand against the cool glass. Outside, the grounds of Ashford Manor spread wide and green in the morning light. The iron fence, the oak allée, the magnolia tree nearest the house so old, its lowest branch nearly touched the grass. He sat across from me at Christmas dinner 3 months ago. I said, my voice rough and low. He refilled my coffee. He told me to take care of my knee. My throat tightened painfully. And the whole time he was planning to, yes, Harold said, and there was no gentleness in his voice now, only a clear, hard certainty. He was, which is exactly why what we do on Thursday matters. Not just for you, William, for every person Ryan and Amber intended to take everything from. I turned around. My jaw was tight, my chest was burning, but somewhere underneath all of it, something had shifted, some deep bedrock thing was holding steady that had not been there 3 days ago. I looked at Harold, and I felt for the first time in 68 years that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 3 days, I said. 3 days. Harold rose from his chair, extended his hand across the table. and his eyes carried something would later understand was a 30-year promise finally reaching its answer. "Welcome back, Mr. Ashford." I shook his hand. My grip was firm, my eyes were dry, and through the window, the South Carolina sun climbed higher over the live oak trees, slow and golden, and completely indifferent to the storm that was 3 days away. I am about to walk you through the moment. Everything finally came to light, the boardroom, the evidence, and the look on my son's face when he understood it was over. Before I do, drop 13 in the comments, so I know you are still here. You have come this far with me. I do not want to lose you now. Brief note, some scenes in this story were constructed for storytelling clarity and emotional impact. If you have concerns about fictional content, this is a natural pause point, though I hope you will stay. 3 days passed, the way a held breath passes, slow, pressurized, and impossible to sustain. Harold had a charcoal suit laid out for me on the morning of Thursday, March 27th. It was hanging on the back of the bedroom door when I woke at 5:30, and I stood in front of it for nearly a full minute before I touched it. The fabric was fine wool, the color of a storm cloud, and on the breast pocket, embroidered in silver thread, so small you had to look twice to see it was the Ashford family crest. I reached out and pressed 2 fingers against it. "It was your father's," Harold said from the doorway. In the last year of his life, he had it made in the size of a grown man, the son he always pictured coming home. He never had reason to give it. My throat closed entirely. I took the cup, swallowed hard, and turned back to the suit. "Then I'd better not waste it," I said. The drive from Ashford Manor to downtown Charleston took 22 minutes. George drove steady and quiet, while Harold reviewed his documents in the seat beside me, and I watched the city wake up outside the window. The morning was clean and pale gold, the kind of March morning that makes Charleston look like a painting, all wrought iron and window boxes, and the distant glitter of the harbor. I had driven through this city 10,000 times in my life, as Joseph Carter, a warehouse worker with bad knees and a modest savings account, and a son I would have done anything for. This was the first time I drove through it as William Ashford. "Tell me about Margaret Holloway," I said, breaking the quiet. Harold looked up from his papers. 71 years old. She has served on the Ashford Capital Board for 19 years. She was appointed by your father in 2006. She was the only board member Edmund told about you. Not the full story, but enough. He paused. She knows a search was ongoing. She knows what the DNA result means. She will not be surprised to see you. And the others, 7 board members total. 3 senior executives, including Ryan. Harold's voice stayed level, but something in his jaw tightened. None of them know what today is. As far as they are aware, this is a standard Thursday board meeting quarterly portfolio review. He closed his folder. Ryan submitted his agenda items yesterday. He sent them from his office computer at 4:47 in the afternoon. I turned to look at Harold. He has no idea. None, Harold said. And for just a moment, something that was not quite satisfaction moved behind his gray eyes. None whatsoever. Ashford Capital Group occupied the top 4 floors of a restored Beaux-Arts building on Broad Street, 2 blocks from the waterfront. The lobby was high-ceilinged and marble-floored with the family crest set into the floor in black and gold mosaic large enough that you had to step around it or directly over it, depending on who you were. I stepped over it. The security desk was manned by a young woman in a navy blazer who looked up as we entered and opened her mouth to deliver a standard visitor greeting. Then her eyes dropped to my breast pocket, to the embroidered crest, and something shifted in her expression. She closed her mouth. She straightened. "Good morning, sir," she said, and her voice had changed entirely. Harold stepped forward before I could respond. Harold Bennett, Chief Counsel and Executor of the Edmund Ashford Estate. "We have a 9 o'clock with Ms. Holloway." He set a business card on the desk without being asked. The elevator ride to the 41st floor took less than a minute, but my heart was working hard the entire way up. Not from fear, I had moved past fear sometime in the middle of the night, lying awake in Edmund's house holding that cream-colored envelope against my chest. What I felt now was something older and more complicated, a kind of reckoning. The sense that 68 years of a life lived under the wrong name were pressing up behind me like a wave, and I was finally turning around to face it. Margaret Holloway met us in the corridor outside the boardroom. She was a tall woman, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed in charcoal and pearls, and she moved with the kind of measured authority that came from 2 decades of holding a room together. When she saw me, she stopped walking. Her eyes went to my face, then to the crest on my pocket, then back to my face, and her chin lifted slightly, the way a person's does when they are fighting to keep their composure. "Mr. Ashford," she said, and her voice was completely steady except for the faintest tremor on the last syllable. "Ms. Holloway?" I extended my hand and she took it with both of hers and held it for just a moment longer than a handshake required. "Edmund talked about you," she said quietly. "For years he talked about you. He never stopped believing." She released my hand and pressed her lips together briefly, pulling herself back to the formality the moment required. "The room is ready. Everyone is inside." She glanced at Harold. "The materials are loaded on the presentation system as you requested." "Thank you, Margaret," Harold said. She nodded once, turned, and pushed open the heavy mahogany door. The boardroom was long and paneled in dark wood, with a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Morning light flooded in from the east, catching the surface of the conference table, a long expanse of polished walnut, surrounded by leather chairs, most of them already occupied. Board members in suits, executives with laptops, an assistant near the far wall taking notes. And at the far end of the table in the chair that faced the door, a man in a charcoal jacket with a blue pocket square was leaning back with the easy posture of someone who believed this room belonged to him. Ryan. He was scrolling through something on his phone when the door opened. He looked up with the automatic, half-attentive expression of a person expecting a colleague, and then his eyes found me. The phone dropped 2 inches in his hand. I watched the color leave his face in real time. I watched his lips part. I watched his eyes dart to Harold, then back to me, then to the crest on my breast pocket. And I saw the exact moment the recognition arrived, not just recognition of his father's face, but recognition of what that face in this room, in this suit, on this morning meant. His hand gripped the edge of the table. "Dad." The word came out as barely a sound, cracked and airless, like a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not solid. I walked to the head of the table, the opposite end from Ryan, and I set both hands flat on the polished walnut surface and looked at every face in that room one by one until I had seen all of them. Then I spoke. "My name," I said, and my voice did not shake, "is William Edmund Ashford, and I am home." The silence that followed those words lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted them in my own heartbeat, and then the room erupted. 2 board members spoke at once. An executive half rose from his chair. Margaret Holloway moved to the presentation panel without a word and pressed a single button, and the screen behind me lit up with the first document, the DNA certification red-stamped and notarized from the private laboratory in Colombia. Harold was already moving. He set his briefcase on the table, unlatched it with 2 precise clicks, and began distributing document packets to every seat, thick, tabbed, color-coded. His movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, the way a man moves when he has rehearsed something 10,000 times, and the moment has finally come. I kept my eyes on Ryan. Ryan had not moved from his chair. His hand was still braced against the edge of the table, knuckles, pale jaw working like he was trying to find the architecture of a sentence and kept losing it. His blue pocket square, I noticed it now with strange, painful clarity, was folded into a perfect point, the kind of careful detail a man tends to when he wants the world to believe he has everything in order. "Dad," he said again, louder this time, forcing the word into the room like a claim. What is going on? What is this? He swept his eyes around the table, pitching his voice toward the other board members, performing confusion. I don't understand what… Ryan. Harold's voice was quiet and absolute, the way a closing door is quiet. I will ask you not to speak until the presentation is complete. You will have an opportunity to respond. That time is not now. Ryan's mouth snapped shut. His chest was heaving. Harold pressed a button on the remote, and the DNA document gave way to the second slide. A scan of Edmund Ashford's will, the key clause enlarged and highlighted in yellow, my biological son, William. Edmund Ashford, sole heir to all personal assets, real property, and controlling interest in Ashford Capital Group. A board member near the center of the table, a heavy-set man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, leaned forward and read the slide carefully. Then he looked at me, then at Harold. This is notarized and probate filed. Charleston County Probate Court, March 2022. Harold confirmed. DNA confirmation received Tuesday, March 25th. The estate transfer is legally active as of that date. He looked at the room steadily. Every person in this building has been for the past 2 years working for William Ashford without knowing it. The heavy-set board member removed his reading glasses entirely and set them on the table with a soft click. Good Lord, this is insane. Ryan shoved back from his chair and stood, and his voice had climbed an octave edged with something that was trying to be outrage, but was shaking too hard to hold its shape. You walk in here with some document and a DNA test, and you think what? That you can just… He pointed at me, his finger unsteady. He's my father, Joseph Carter. He worked in a warehouse for 40 years. He doesn't know anything about… The third document, please, I said to Harold. My voice was level. My hands at my sides were balled into fists. The screen changed. Ryan's bank records appeared, the 7 withdrawals from my savings account, totaling $47,218 each, dated during the 10 days I lay in a coma at Trident Medical Center. The room went very still. A woman near the window, one of the senior executives, made a sound that was not quite a word. Those withdrawals were made using your father's debit card and PIN, Harold said to the room, though his eyes were on Ryan. The PIN was obtained without authorization. Under South Carolina law, that constitutes felony financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Ryan's face had gone from white to a blotched, ugly red. I was covering expenses while he was… The fourth document, I said. The real estate deed appeared. Ryan Carter and Amber Carter. 412 Millbrook Drive, North Charleston. Purchase price $155,000. Dated during my hospitalization. Financed using a power of attorney bearing my signature. Harold advanced the slide. Forensic handwriting analysis. 94% certainty of forgery. The signature does not match any verified sample of Mr. Ashford's handwriting across a 20-year document history. Ryan's hand came up and covered his mouth. He was breathing hard through his nose, his eyes moving rapidly around the table, like a man calculating which exits were still open. Finding none. Ryan. I spoke his name, and something in my chest tore open. When I said it, not with anger, but with a grief so enormous I could barely contain it inside my body. My eyes burned. My voice was steady only because I forced it to be. Look at me. He looked at me. His eyes were glassy, the muscles around them tight with something that was not yet remorse but was close to it, the look of a man watching the story. He told himself, about himself, come apart in real time. The fifth document, Harold said quietly. The screen changed one final time, and the room, every person in it, went absolutely rigid. It was the security footage still framed from the staircase at 412 Millbrook Drive, time-stamped 3 days before my fall. Ryan, in a gray t-shirt, crouched at the base of the stair railing with a wrench in his hand. Then Harold advanced to the text message transcript. Two lines highlighted in yellow projected large enough for every person in the room to read without their glasses. Ryan, the old man might be worth more than we thought. Try 950 million. Amber, we need to make sure he never does. Someone at the table sucked in a sharp breath. Another board member pushed back from the table slightly, as if creating distance from the words on the screen. Ryan's legs gave. Not completely, he caught himself on the back of his chair, gripping it with both hands. His whole body shaking now, a visible, undeniable trembling that moved from his hands up through his shoulders. His mouth was open. No sound was coming out. That railing, I said, and my voice broke on the word. I could not stop, it did not try, sent me into a 10-day coma. I woke up alone in a hospital room with a note on the bedside table telling me I was a burden. My eyes were burning so fiercely I could barely see him. You wrote that note, Ryan. You sold my house. You took my savings, and you stood in that stairwell with a wrench, and you made a choice. A tear ran down my face. I did not wipe it away. The Charleston Police Department White-Collar Crimes Unit and the Violent Crimes Division are currently in the lobby of this building, Harold said. He looked at Ryan with an expression that contained no cruelty and no triumph, only the exhausted, unshakable finality of a man who has been working toward one moment for 30 years. They have warrants for your arrest. Felony financial exploitation, forgery, property fraud, and 1 count of reckless endangerment causing grievous bodily harm. A simultaneous warrant is being executed at your home address for Amber Carter. The door at the far end of the boardroom opened. 2 officers in plain clothes entered, badges visible, and the sound of their footsteps on the hardwood floor was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Ryan looked at me one last time. His face had crumpled entirely, the careful pocket square, the practiced confidence, all of it dissolved, and what was left underneath was something I had not seen on my son's face since he was very young. It looked almost like a child who knew he had done something that could not be taken back. Dad, his voice shattered on the word. I know, I said, and I meant it. I meant all of it, the grief, the love that had not died, even now, the absolute heartbroken certainty that what was happening was right. The officers reached him. The door closed behind the officers, and Ryan, and for 3 full seconds, nobody in that boardroom made a sound, not because they had nothing to say, but because the weight of what had just happened was still settling over the room like dust after a building comes down. Then Margaret Holloway cleared her throat, and every head turned toward her. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, and her voice was granite steady, the voice of a woman who had chaired difficult meetings for 19 years, and intended to chair this one through to its conclusion. We have just witnessed the presentation of DNA-verified identity documentation, a probate-filed will and material evidence of multiple felonies committed by a sitting officer of this company. She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. I move that we formally recognize William Edmund Ashford as the legal owner of controlling interest in Ashford Capital Group, effective immediately pending the completion of estate transfer filings already in progress with Charleston County Probate Court. The heavyset board member, I would later learn his name was Frank Doyle, 22 years on the board, raised his hand without hesitation. Seconded, Harold leaned toward me and said quietly, "You need to vote yes." Yes, I said. The word came out of me barely above a whisper, and my voice cracked on it just slightly, because it was the first time in my life I had voted on anything that was mine. The motion passed 7-0. Margaret picked up a pen, signed the top copy of the resolution document Harold had prepared, and slid it across the table to me. The pen was heavy silver engraved, and when I picked it up, my hand was trembling so badly that Harold placed his hand briefly over mine, steadying it without a word. I signed. William Edmund Ashford. The name felt strange and right and enormous, like stepping into a room you have never entered, but somehow already know the shape of. Congratulations, Mr. Ashford, Margaret said. Her voice was completely composed, but her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with composure. "Welcome to your company." I pressed my lips together hard and nodded because if I had tried to speak in that moment, I would have come apart entirely. Harold's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then looked at me. "Amber Carter was taken into custody at 9:47 this morning at the residence on Millbrook Drive. No resistance." He set the phone face down. "It's done." I exhaled one long, shuddering breath that I had been holding for what felt like 3 weeks, or 68 years, depending on how you counted. My shoulders dropped. My chest ached with something that was not pain exactly, but lived right next to it, the kind of ache that comes when something enormous finally releases its grip. Frank Doyle spoke up from across the table, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Mr. Ashford, I want to say on behalf of this board that we are deeply sorry. We had no knowledge of what Ryan Carter was doing. None of us." He stopped, pressed his mouth flat, then started again. "Edmund was a good man. He deserved better than this outcome. And so did you." The back of my eyes burned hard. "Thank you, Frank," I said, and I meant it down to my bones. Margaret rose from her chair and moved to the windows. "Come," she said, gesturing toward the far end of the room, where a glass door led to a narrow terrace overlooking Broad Street, and beyond it, the harbor. "There is something your father used to do after every board meeting." I followed her outside. The March air hit my face cool and salt-edged, carrying the green smell of the harbor 2 blocks away. Charleston spread out below us, its rooftops and church steeples and the pale thread of the waterfront glittering in the mid-morning light. "He would stand right here," Margaret said, positioning herself at the railing, "and he would look at the city for exactly 5 minutes. He said it reminded him what the work was for." She glanced at me sideways. "He said a man who forgets what he is building toward is just a man who is busy." My throat tightened painfully. I gripped the terrace railing with both hands and looked out at the city, my father's city, the city I had driven through 10,000 times without knowing it, carried my name, and I felt something shift inside me so deep and so final that I knew with absolute certainty that Joseph Carter was gone. Not erased, not forgotten, but finished. I was William Ashford. I was standing on the building my father built in the suit he made for me with the sun on my face and 63 years of lost time pressing at my back. And I was still standing. When I turned back inside, Harold was waiting by the door, his briefcase closed, his expression carrying the particular quiet of a man whose longest task is nearly complete. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and drew out the cream-colored envelope aged honey paper, the handwriting I had not yet let myself study closely, and held it out to me. "Edmund asked me to give you this in a place that was yours," Harold said. "I think this qualifies." I took the envelope with both hands. I pressed it flat against my chest for a moment, felt the slight give of the folded pages inside the thickness of 63 years of words. "Thank you, Harold," I said. My voice came out rough and warm and completely undisguised. "For all of it. Every single year of it." Harold's eyes went bright. He straightened slightly, cleared his throat, and looked somewhere just past my shoulder at the Charleston skyline. "Your father would have been very proud," he said, and his voice for the first and only time since I had known him was not entirely steady. Harold left me alone in Edmund's study. That was what I had asked for, just 30 minutes, the afternoon light coming through the tall windows, the smell of old wood and leather, and something faintly floral that I had come to understand was the residue of 63 years of weekly magnolias. I sat down in Edmund's chair, my father's chair, high-backed and burgundy, worn smooth at the armrests in the exact places where a man's hands would rest during long hours of thought, and I set the cream envelope on the desk in front of me. I looked at it for a long time, then I opened it. The pages inside were not a single letter. They were many folded together, each one dated at the top, in the same careful, slanted hand, each one beginning with the same two words. Dear William, the first page was dated May 14th, 1963, my 6th birthday. Edmund's handwriting was younger there, the strokes more urgent, the pressure on the pen heavy enough that I could feel the indentations on the back of the page with my fingertip. Dear William, you would have been 6 today. I bought a cake anyway, chocolate, because your mother always said you would love chocolate, and I sat with it at the kitchen table for an hour before I could bring myself to put it away. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you are warm. I don't know if someone is reading to you at night, or if you cry and nobody comes. These things live in me like splinters I cannot reach. But I want you to know, wherever you are, that your father is looking. I will not stop. I pressed my fist to my mouth. My eyes filled so fast, the words blurred on the page, and I had to set it down and press both palms flat on the desk and breathe through it, in through my nose, out through my teeth, because the grief that rose in me was so enormous, it had no shape. He wrote one every year, Harold said from the doorway. I had not heard him come back. I looked up. My face was wet. I did not bother pretending otherwise. Every birthday? I asked, and my voice was barely a sound. Harold stepped inside and sat in the chair across the desk. The visitor's chair where I had sat 2 days ago, receiving the architecture of my own life back in document form. Every May 14th, he confirmed. The last one is dated May 14th, 2022, 8 months before he passed. He laced his hands in his lap. There are 63 letters. 63. One for every year I had been gone. I looked down at the stack of pages, and my chest heaved once hard, involuntary, and then I was crying properly, not the controlled, dignified leaking of earlier, but something real and wrenching, a sound coming out of me that I had not made since I was a very small child, and did not know yet that the world could be this cruel or this full of love simultaneously. Harold did not tell me to stop. He did not look away. He sat with me the way a person sits with grief present and steady and quiet, without being absent. When I could breathe again, I wiped my face with the back of my hand and picked up a page from near the middle of the stack. May 14th, 1989. I would have been 32. Dear William, I promoted a young attorney today, Harold Bennett. Sharp mind, loyal heart. I told him about you, only a little. He asked if he could help with the search. I told him the search never stops. He said he understood. I believe he did. I hope you are well wherever you are. I hope you have someone who makes you laugh. I hope so many things for you, son. I always have. He told you about me in 1989, I said, looking up at Harold. Harold's jaw worked briefly. He did. I was 31 years old, and I had just made chief counsel, and he called me into this office. He gestured at the room around us, and he sat exactly where you are sitting, and he showed me the photograph of you as a boy. He said, Harold, I have one task that matters more than every other task in this building combined. Don't let me die without finishing it. Harold's voice recovered. I told him I wouldn't. That was 34 years ago. I set down the letter and pressed both hands over my face for a moment. The magnitude of it, 34 years of Harold's life, devoted to a promise made to a grieving father, settled over me like something physical, something I could feel on my skin. Harold. I dropped my hands and looked at him directly. Why, you could have stepped back at any point. After the orphanage records burned. After the first 10 years. After 20. Why didn't you? Harold considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Then he said, because Edmund never did. He met my eyes. And because some promises are not the kind you can put down. I nodded slowly. My throat was too full to produce words for a moment. When they came, they were simple ones, the only ones that were adequate. "Thank you," I said. "Harold, thank you." He nodded once, pressed his lips together, and looked at the window. I picked up the last letter in the stack. May 14th, 2022. Edmund's handwriting was slower here, the strokes less even, the hand of an old man, a sick man, but the same man who had written the first line in 1963 with a heavy pen at a kitchen table with an uneaten birthday cake. "Dear William, I am 68 years old today. So are you. Can you imagine that? My boy, 68 years old. I don't know what your face looks like now. I don't know if your hair went gray early the way mine did, or if you kept it dark like your mother. I don't know if you found happiness. I pray you did. I pray every single day that wherever life put you, there was some version of happiness in it. I am leaving everything to you, all of it. Not because of the money is nothing. It is just numbers, but because this company is the thing I built while I was waiting for you to come home. I built it so that when you returned, there would be something worthy of the Ashford name waiting for you. Come home, William. It is not too late. It was never too late. I love you. I have always loved you. Your father, Edmund. I set the letter down very carefully on the desk in front of me. My hands were shaking so hard that the page trembled as I released it. "Harold," I said, and my voice was wrecked and quiet and completely honest. "I want to do something for the people who never found their way home, for the people who woke up in the wrong life and didn't have a Harold, didn't have a letter." I looked up at him. "I want to create a foundation, the Second Chance Foundation. Real support, legal aid, housing, family reconnection services, real help." Harold's expression moved through something surprise, then warmth, then something that looked very much like Edmund Ashford in a 34-year-old memory, saying some promises are not the kind you can put down. "Edmund would have loved that," Harold said, and this time he did not try to keep his voice steady. "Good." I pressed my palms flat on my father's desk, felt the worn wood solid under my hands, and looked around the room that had waited 63 years for me to fill it. Then let's begin. 6 months had passed since the morning I walked into Ashford Capital and said my own name out loud for the first time. September had come to Charleston the way it always does, slowly, the heat pulling back by degrees, the harbor air turning from thick and heavy to something cleaner and cooler that moved through the live oaks like a quiet reminder that the world keeps turning, regardless of what any of us have done or survived. I was at my desk. Edmund's desk, my desk now reviewing the Second Chance Foundation's first quarterly report, when Harold knocked twice and entered without waiting, which told me immediately that whatever he was carrying was not routine. "You need to see something," he said. He set 2 items on the desk in front of me. The first was a manila folder. The second was a plain white envelope handwritten with a return address I recognized as the Lieber Correctional Institution in Ridgeville, South Carolina. Ryan's handwriting. I would know it anywhere. My chest tightened like a fist closing around my heart. I pressed my fingertips to the envelope but did not pick it up. "What's in the folder first?" I said. Harold opened it. "Amber Carter filed for divorce on August 3rd. He said, his voice measured and careful. "The petition was granted on an uncontested basis 11 days ago. Under the terms of the settlement, she retained the Millbrook Drive property, the house purchased with your money, along with all joint bank accounts and Ryan's personal investment portfolio." Harold paused. Ryan's attorney attempted to challenge the asset division from his cell. The court dismissed it. Another pause. "He has nothing, William. Not a dollar." The irony of it was so complete and so savage that I did not know whether to laugh or to grieve. The man who had taken everything from me to give to Amber had been left with nothing by the very same woman. I pressed my knuckles briefly against my lips and stared at the desk surface. "She planned that too, didn't she?" I said. It was not a question. "From the beginning," Harold said quietly. Her attorney structured the prenuptial agreement to favor her position in the event of Ryan's criminal conviction. She anticipated it. He closed the folder. "She is currently living in the Millbrook Drive house, the house you paid for." My jaw tightened. But the anger that rose in me was distant, almost impersonal, the way you feel about a storm that already passed and cannot be called back. I picked up Ryan's envelope. The letter inside was 2 pages handwritten on lined paper, the penmanship uneven in a way his careful boardroom self would never have allowed. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve to ask for it. But I need you to know that I am sorry, not because I got caught, not because she left me with nothing, but because of who I chose to be. You worked 40 years in a warehouse. You never asked me for anything, and I looked at you and saw a problem to solve instead of a father to love. That is the thing I will carry for the rest of my life. I hope the foundation helps people. I hope you are well. I hope I don't know what I hope except that you are not in pain anymore. Your son, Ryan." I set the letter down. My eyes were burning, not with rage, not with grief exactly, but with something quieter and more final. The love that had not died even in the boardroom, the love that had cracked my voice when I said his name to the officers. It was still there. Reduced, reshaped, carrying scar tissue, but still there. "Harold," I said, "I'm going to write him back." Harold's expression shifted, surprised, then something warmer than surprise. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a small velvet pouch on the desk between us. "Before you do," he said, "there is one more thing." I opened the velvet pouch with hands that were not entirely steady. Inside, resting against the dark fabric, was a silver bracelet, narrow-gauged, handcrafted, unmistakably made by the same hand that had made the one on my wrist. Not identical. A companion piece. Where mine bore the Ashford crest on its face, this one bore an inscription along its inner band, 6 words, engraved so small I had to hold it close to the window light to read them. I looked up at Harold. My throat had closed entirely. "Your father had it made in 1961, Harold said, and his voice was soft and unhurried, the voice of a man delivering the last piece of a story he has been tending for 30 years. He wore his half every day until the morning he went into hospice. He asked me to keep the other half until I found you." Harold's chin lifted slightly. "I have been carrying it for 2 years and 3 months. I held the new bracelet beside my own in the window light, one in each hand, and I read the inscription on the inside band slowly, my lips barely moving. An Ashford is never truly lost. I pressed it against my chest with both hands, my eyes closing, my breath coming in long and unsteady. The bracelet on my wrist had told me who I was for 67 years, without my knowing it. This one made by a father who had pictured the man his son would grow into, who had ordered it crafted and kept it waiting in a velvet pouch for decades, told me something different. It told me he had always believed I was coming home. My shoulders shook. I pressed both hands over my mouth and bent forward over the desk and let it come, not the sharp, jagged grief of the hospital room or the boardroom, but something different, something that had warmth in it alongside the pain, something that felt like arriving. Harold put his hand on my shoulder and kept it there. When I could breathe again, I clasped the completed bracelet back onto my wrist. The weight of it was different now, heavier, fuller, the way a sentence feels different when its final word is spoken. "Let's go outside," Harold said, and his voice was rough at the edges in a way I had never heard before and found I loved. We went up to the roof of Ashford Manor. The September evening was cooling rapidly, the sky above Charleston going amber and rose and deep blue at the edges, the harbor a strip of hammered silver in the distance. The live oaks below us moved in the evening wind, their Spanish moss trailing slow and silver gray. I stood at the low wall at the roof's edge, my wrist resting on the stone, the completed bracelet catching the last of the light. "Harold," I said, "thank you for every single year of it." He stood beside me, shoulders straight, eyes on the horizon, and said nothing for a moment. And then he exhaled long and slow, the breath of a man who has just set down something he has been carrying for a very long time. "It was the only promise worth keeping," he said. The sun finished its descent behind the Charleston rooftops, and for the first time in 68 years, I was exactly who I was supposed to be. If there is one thing this journey taught me, it is this: the truth does not disappear just because someone buries it. God has a way of returning what was always yours in His own time by His own hand. You may not see it coming. I certainly did not. I spent 68 years living as the wrong man in the right world. I trusted, blindly loved without condition, and paid a price so heavy it nearly broke me. If you take nothing else from this grandpa stories today, take this: do not wait until you are lying in a hospital bed, reading a note that calls you a burden, to understand your own worth. That is the mistake I made. Do not make it yours. I have sat with this family story long enough to say, it plainly hollows a person out from the inside. Ryan had everything a son could need, and he chose more. Amber calculated every move, and in the end, she won nothing worth keeping. In my personal opinion, the cruelest poverty is not an empty wallet. It is an empty conscience. These are the things I believe now. At 68 years old, standing on the roof of a house that carries my name, love outlasts betrayal, loyalty outlasts time and an honest life. However small is worth more than a stolen fortune. This has been my grandpa stories, raw, painful, and real. If something here stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me which moment hit hardest. Share this family story with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribing to this channel is the kindest thing you can do for an old man who finally found his way home. Thank you truly deeply for staying with me until the very end of this family story. It means more than you know. And one final note: some upcoming stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted solely for storytelling and reflection. They are built to inspire, not to mislead. If that is not the content for you, no hard feelings, step away and find what feeds your soul. But if you choose to stay, I promise you this: every story will be told with honesty, heart, and the kind of truth that only time can teach.